Hello, everyone. Tony East here covering the Indiana Fever for the next. Apologies for the long delay between free agency videos. The team has not held any press conferences. I haven't seen any players in the wild, and I got married. So I had my own time off for a honeymoon. But now I have a lot to get to talking Fever free agency, the mechanics of what's happened, the moves they've made, the players they have going out, and why I think they've done everything they have, and the stuff to watch for going forward is now much smaller. They've really reached kind of what I would consider the end of their major moves, with a lot of smaller decisions to come. In the first video, we ran through a lot, internally, the re-signing of Kelsey Mitchell, the trade of Nalissa Smith, and then the additions of Natasha Howard, Dewana Bonner, Sophie Cunningham, and Sydney Colson at the time. Since then, a lot has happened. But for those of you who didn't watch that video, I will let you know that I concluded it talking about the Fever's financial outlook and why their financial outlook suggested to me that a move could be coming. Maybe not both of the things that happened since then, but a move could be coming internally for financially motivated reasons, either involving their draft pick or involving Jaylen Brown, a guard wing kind of hybrid player that they acquired from the Dallas Wings in that Nalissa Smith trade. And the two players I told you to focus on were Lou Samuelson, who had a large protected contract, and Kristy Wallace, who was on a smaller protected contract, both because it made sense for the Fever to use those salary slots in other ways, and because those players were likely headed for exceedingly small roles on the Fever this year. I mused at the time that I wondered if they could be traded to a team that either needed to hit the salary floor or just valued them differently, such as a Golden State or a Washington. But in the end, neither of them got traded, and yet they are no longer on the Indiana Fever. We'll run through those, the signing of Brianna Turner, and what I think you can expect going forward for the rest of that in free agency, plus a few more smaller notes that I think you, as a fan of the Fever or just a general observer, should know. So, Lou Samuelson first up here. Following a very long trend that I've covered many a time, the Fever to Storm buyout process. So Lou Samuelson was making $180,000 on a protected contract this season. And she was probably not going to be in the Fever's rotation between a starting five of Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Dewana Bonner, Natasha Howard, and Aaliyah Boston. That's at least my projection. And a bench featuring Lexi Hall, Sophie Cunningham, and Damiris Dantas. Not a lot of room for another wing guard in there, and that doesn't even account for a Sydney Colson. So not a lot of playing time available for someone like Lou. And if she thinks she could make more money or play more somewhere else, and in this case, actually, it turns out probably both, it might have made sense for her to explore a buyout and get to a new team, and that is what happened here. So Lou Samuelson, this used to be called in the WNBA a contract divorce. They have now thankfully changed that phrasing. That phrasing stunk. It's now called a mutual parting of ways. So what happens is the Fever renegotiate Lou Samuelson's contract downward, and then waive her. So her contract goes from being $180,000 this year down to about $101,000. However, there's a $5,000 charge for buying out a player. So her cap hit now becomes $106,419 for the rest of this season for the Fever. So the Fever gets savings. They save over $70,000 by doing this, that directly becomes cap space in this instance that they could use to sign another player. Lou gets $106,000 from the Fever, and then she, after clearing waivers 5 days later, signed an $80,000 deal with the Seattle Storm. So Lou actually comes out ahead. She's going to make a little bit more money this season as a result of this move. She goes to a Seattle team where she'll likely play more often. I predict that she will play better this year than last year, just because of the distance from having a child for her. That will help her physically. She mentioned the challenges of that last year in her first season returning from that. So that will be no indictment of the Fever, just how the timing worked. And in Seattle, she might be able to play a little more, and that team won't play quite as fast. So I think that will suit her a little bit as well. So no indictment of anyone here. This is the right fit for both teams. This makes sense for the Fever. They get savings, which we'll talk about why that's helpful for them later. And Lou gets to go to a place that she could play more, she fits better, and in the end, she gets out ahead salary-wise just a little bit too. She's actually playing pretty well in Unrivaled right now. So that is the mechanics of that transaction. That works out well for the Fever to me because they needed some savings. We'll explain why later. I keep saying later, but I had to go through this chronologically so it all makes sense. The other internal move involving a player I thought the Fever could try to figure out the salary of was Kristy Wallace. Kristy Wallace, not a fan favorite at all. I thought that She was better than most fans, although I do understand that she probably was the worst player left rostered by the Fever prior to this move. She's sitting out this year. Very not rare in the W. This does happen. The players can make money playing in other leagues and have different obligations. So Kristy Wallace will not play, just won't play in the 2025 WNBA season. And so her $80,000 protected deal is suspended, is the terminology the Fever use. She is not physically, the Fever did not suspend her. She is not in trouble. Her contract is suspended, meaning that if she returns to the W, it's an $80,000 one-year deal, which actually I will get back to in a second, but pretty juicy contract. So she is just removed from the Fever's books. That is great for the Fever. Who knows what the impetus was for this? Perhaps Wally has some other goals for this season. Maybe she wants to play in a different league. Maybe she's going to make money some other way. Maybe she's not going to play basketball at all for a year. Who knows? I'm not going to guess what her internal reasoning was for this, because she cannot play for a different team by doing this. The Fever benefit is, again, like with Katie Lou, a player who is certainly not going to be in their rotation and was going to take up money and finances, is off the salary cap books and off the roster for the year. This has happened in past seasons with an Argentine draft pick that they had. This happened with Temi Fagbenle's contract several times as she sat out WNBA seasons before last year. Not unusual. So that is the reality there. Again, I'm not going to guess at her motivations. I'm not going to guess at what the Fever wanted or did want to happen there, but this does help them uniquely because of their salary situation. So to finish up what the Fever have done and their salary reality, I think everybody kind of guessed, and something I wondered specifically was how can they get a backup center, right? Damiris Dantas, I suppose, could be the backup center for the Fever. I think she fits them kind of well because she can shoot it, but they probably need a little more defense at that spot, certainly, and they got that. Their addition is Brianna Turner, who has been was with the Chicago Sky last year in those rivalry games, I guess you could call them, whatever you want to call those little tiffs. I don't think that those are rivalry games. I wrote as much, but they certainly became a fascinating thing. Regardless, Brianna Turner, Fever bound as a backup five. Turner has played for many teams in the past and is now the backup center for the Fever. I'll start with this. I don't actually know anything about these things, but I'm not very Twitter smart. Apparently she had some tweets about the Fever last year that some fans said, oh, why are the Fever adding this player? Is this going to cause a locker room problem? There's no way the front office would sign a player who didn't want to be on the team. She wouldn't have signed a contract with the Fever. She didn't want to be on the team. I can't imagine that tweets are enough to actually cause internal strife. These are adults playing basketball. That struck me as very surprising to see fans see that and go, wow, clearly the front office, is not caring about what they're saying about protecting the locker room. To me, it's the opposite in that they do care about that, and they vetted the process to know that this makes sense to do, right? We've heard Lexi Brown talking very recently about, what the appeal of the Fever can be for free agents, right? So I do understand trepidation about the way players in the past have reacted to what the Fever franchise is and the fandom and all that. I'm not going to get into that. I don't even remember what Brianna Turner's tweets were. However, some people had some trepidation about that, and I found that to be very surprising. These are adults who all have a shared common goal. They can get over things from the past. Turner, defense is the name of her game. Twice making an all-defense first team, finishing third in Defensive Player of the Year in 2021 and fourth in 2020. Okay play finisher, right? Field goal percentage over 60% each of the last 3 seasons. Not a shooter at all. That is unique to her on this Fever team. So her and Leah Boston probably going to be the two worst, air quotes, shooters on this team. Her minutes dropped a lot with the Sky last year. She was playing well over 20 minutes a game with Phoenix for years before being largely a bench player with the Sky. So she can play more than she did last year, but a decent rebounder and truly a backup five, right? That is, I think, important for the Fever. A little on the smaller side, right? Shorter than Boston, shorter than Bonner, shorter than Dantas, but a true five, a good defensive five to really round out the rotation. I'd imagine now that then this is why I think you can expect Fever free agency to slow down, and I think this is kind of bared out this way by the fact that nothing has really happened since then, is that they're kind of set now, right? A starting five, the one I mentioned earlier of Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, DeWanna Bonner, Natasha Howard, and Aaliyah Boston makes sense. with direct positional pulls right behind them of Sydney Colson as a ball handler, 2 wings in Lexi Hall and Sophie Cunningham, a stretch 4 type in Damiris Dantas, and a backup 5 in Brianna Turner with versatility there. Hall and Cunningham can both play 2-3. Dantas can play 4-5. You have Turner there. Jaylen Brown can mix in as something between 1 and 3, whatever you want to say. And if Caitlin Clark plays 40 minutes a lot like she did last year, or Kelsey Mitchell plays a bunch of minutes, she could be your backup point guard. They just have a lot of versatility to fill all the positions now. They really needed a backup 5, and they were able to sign Turner 1 year, $85,000 unprotected. Basically every deal signed this summer was unprotected because of those other moves, right? Not having Samuelson's deal or Wallace's deal opened up quite a bit of space for this Fever group, which is really important for them to really fill out what they wanted. So that all kind of played in together, right? Those moves were tied up. The Katie Lou buyout came before the Turner signing, and then the Wallace waiver came after the Turner signing, which is also relevant because something else I talked about in the last video regarding Fever free agency was the team trying to fit in their draft picks. And I still think this is something to watch going forward. As things stand now, the Fever have 11 players under contract, and they're under the salary cap. Right now, if they did nothing before opening night, they could have a legal team, right? Great, that's great. But they cannot right now fit in their draft picks. If they pick anybody, they would go over the cap. The 19th pick and 20th pick have a salary just under $70,000. The 33rd pick is just over $66,000. And the Fever right now are about $46,000 from the salary cap. So as it stands now, they cannot fit in a draft pick. I have made the case that if I'm a WNBA team, I am trying very, very hard to pick someone who's going to be on my team this year, because rookie scale contracts are long, multi-year deals. And with the way the new CBA kicks in next year, it's very possible that rookie scale deals go up a lot in value, and old ones will be very cheap contracts, which could be good for team building. Now, the player has to be good to be worth that money anyway, so you do run the risk of the player just not being worth it, but I would try to run that risk. However, if the Fever want to keep one of their draft picks, they would have to waive someone on their team right now. Jaylen Brown's contract is unprotected. Brianna Turner's contract is unprotected. Sydney Colson's is unprotected. Perhaps that could be a roster battle, specifically with Brown, who's a rookie who didn't play much last year because of injury. But as of now, I think the most likely thing, this is just me guessing, right? I don't know what the Fever are thinking. I don't know how much Jaylen Brown figures into their plans specifically, but they could just decide to draft overseas players and stash them. But if they truly want to do what I'm suggesting and have a cheap draft pick, they might have to find a way to free up 20 more thousand of space, which is not really easy to do. I suppose a Damiris Dantas trade could help with that, but that's just total conjecture for me. That is a complete guess. Dantas is good and fits, and I'd imagine, given the way that the expansion draft with, I don't know this. Again, this is another guess from me, but if they protected someone that wasn't Temi Fagbenle, I'd imagine that it was Dantas, right? Who else would the sixth player have been? So a lot of guessing for me there, but I'm just reading between the lines of the way they want to play, what their team looks like it's going to be, the moves that they made, and the way it looks like to me is likely the 11 players they have now would be the most likely favorites to be their team on opening night next year. And then what I would guess is, here's what could happen. The way that this works is, as the season progresses, the minimum salary prorates down from what it costs on opening night, right? So let's say you're halfway through the season, a minimum contract signed halfway through the season costs half of that $66,000 minimum. So there will be a point where the Fever can use their cap space to sign a 12th player. It just won't be opening night as of right now. And so if they keep Jaylen Brown or a draft pick, that's what you can expect is at some point during the season, they will add a 12th player at a position that they see fit, which to me would probably be a third point guard or just a third ball handler in general. Again, a lot of guessing for me, for just reading what their depth chart appears to be, reading what their roster looks like, and deciding those kind of things based on the moves that they've made. But that is what you can expect next, is them to figure out the very, very back end of their roster ahead of the draft. Because right now, without waiving a player they have on their team, they cannot keep any of their draft picks. Clearly, as they traded away the 8th pick, draft not a huge priority to them. They're trying to win. They're trying to win now. Rookies don't typically, especially not very high pick rookies, don't typically help you win right away. So we'll see where they end up going. My clear guess, would be that the 11 players they have now are the most likely 11 players to be their opening night roster with a chance that an impressive draft pick could sneak in there like Victoria Saxton did 2 seasons ago. That has happened before, and it will happen again in the future of the WNBA. So other notes that you guys need to know about the Fever. Some of these free agency related, some of them not. Grace Berger was waived. Obviously, that was a long time ago. She has been claimed by the Minnesota Lynx. She'll be playing in Minnesota on her same deal that she got drafted on. Katie Lou was, in fact, signed by the Seattle Storm. I mentioned that earlier. And that's interesting because that is a very common buyout path. Jantel Lavender did that. She got bought out by the Fever and then signed to the Storm. Victoria Vivians did that last year, bought out by the Fever and then signed to the Storm. I believe Candice Dupree was a buyout that signed to the Storm years ago. It's very common. It's just a coincidence, but a very common trend of players making up their salary and then ending up with Seattle. And speaking of Seattle, Erica Wheeler has signed with the Storm as well. There was just no role for her in Indiana either, as was the case with some of the other players departing that we mentioned earlier. So that's all the departures and new signings. Caitlin Clark talked about the new Fever facilities. You can find that right here on this channel. I thought that was noteworthy offseason news. I posted that interview. The Iowa preseason game that the Fever are playing at Carver Hawkeye has already sold out the day the tickets came out. That's awesome for the fans that get to go. Bummer it didn't get to public sale, but sweet. That'll be a sweet environment and a very cool game. The Fever's games against the Washington Mystics have been moved to Baltimore, a bigger arena, plus the Mystics Arena is under construction. You can read more about that, I believe, on the Mystics release. And a WNBA game between the Las Vegas Aces and the Dallas Wings is coming to Notre Dame, actually. If you want to check that out, if you're an Indiana resident and want to see those two teams play, you could check that out as well. I thought that was noteworthy stuff that some of the viewers of this channel might want to see. This was a lot of me rambling and just running through my notes, but I find this to be the best way for me to get all my own opinions blended with the reality of what the Fever have done, combining my knowledge of the salary cap, my knowledge of the team's past and present, with what they've done. And if you found this interesting or you have any questions, you can find my work in the next where I write about all this stuff. I'll have a story about the Brianna Turner signing coming up. Again, haven't been able to work much with my honeymoon and wedding. Apologies about that. And I'll do videos intermittently on this channel and much more often when the Fever season starts. A lot of Pacers right now because I cover them as well, and they're currently playing. But once the Fever get rolling, you can expect much more from me here. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you learned something and enjoyed. I'm on Twitter if you want to find me there, at TonyREast. Thank you so much. Catch you in the next one.